decades, breaking the sound barrier over land was banned because the boom was too loud. That single rule kept every country, and including China, from building true supersonic fleets. But now NASA has dropped a $500 million X-59 test jet that flies faster than sound while sounding like a car door shutting. If this jet proves the boom can be quiet, the rules change. And the country that owns quiet Mach speed gets a strategic advantage no one else is ready for. So what does NASA know that China doesn't? And why is a weird-looking test jet making Beijing nervous? What the X-59 actually is. The X-59 doesn't look like a normal jet, because it isn't trying to be one. NASA didn't spend $632 million to build a cool prototype. They built a rule breaker. It's long, ridiculously long. A 99-foot airframe with a 38-foot nose that stretches nearly a third of its entire body. The wings, only 29.5 feet across, narrower than many business jets. The shape isn't stylistic. It's engineered to control shockwaves like a scalpel. There's no forward window, not because NASA wanted to be futuristic, but because a traditional cockpit would destroy the quiet boom geometry. Instead, pilots fly using the external vision system, two ultra-high-resolution cameras feeding a live 4K display. Under that long spine sits a single GEF 414GE100 engine, pushing around 22,000 pounds of thrust. Not the biggest engine, but placed on top of the fuselage so the aircraft's body shields the ground from most shockwaves. At Mach 1.4s and about 925 miles per hour at 55,000 feet, the X-59 should generate a 75 PLDB thump instead of the violent 105 to 110 PLDB sonic boom that made Concorde illegal over land. For comparison, 75 PLDB approximately closing a car door. 110 PLDB approximately small explosion. China's current supersonic concept, approximately 84 PLDB. NASA's mission is simple. Fly this jet over real towns. Measure the sound, prove the boom is quiet, and hand that data to regulators. Because the moment the FAA and ICA accept quiet supersonic travel, the US becomes the nation that unlocks overland Mach speed flight. Something banned since 1973 across more than 3 million square miles of US airspace. So while the X-59 looks like a strange science project, it's actually a lever. How the X-59 actually silences a sonic boom. A quiet supersonic jet doesn't happen by luck. NASA didn't just stretch the nose and hope for the best. They rebuilt the entire shockwave from scratch. X-59 reshapes the shockwave, literally. A normal supersonic jet creates a violent N wave, a pressure spike that hits all at once. The X-59 doesn't do that. It breaks the wave into multiple microshocks spread across the aircraft's length. Instead of boom, it becomes a series of tiny pressure steps that reach the ground gently. NASA calls this low boom signature shaping. It cuts peak pressure by up to 90%. 2. The canards and wings are tuned like musical instruments. This is the part nobody notices. The X-59's small front wings, canards, aren't just for stability. They create their own timed shockwave, which lines up perfectly with the next wave coming off the fuselage. If they're off by even a few inches, the entire quiet boom system fails. The main wing uses a cranked arrow design that spreads lift using a soft distribution. No sudden jumps in pressure. This is precision engineering at the millisecond level. 3. Shockwaves hit off the body, not the edges. Most supersonic jets form harsh shocks where body panels, intakes, and wing roots meet. The X-59 uses an ultra-smooth fuselage, tolerances down to 0.002 inches, so shockwaves slide past these points instead of piling up. This prevents the huge side shocks that normally make sonic booms unbearable. 4. The materials keep the aircraft perfectly shaped at Mach 1.4. Supersonic heat can warp metal ever so slightly. A tiny expansion in the wrong place can spike the noise instantly. So, NASA built the X-59 with high-temp composite skins, titanium frames, thermal expansion control zones. The shape stays locked, even when the airframe heats up at 925 miles per hour. No warping equals no broken shockwave geometry. 5. NASA tests the boom with ground microphone farms. This is the secret sauce. NASA built large microphone arrays on test ranges that record the shockwave at dozens of points. If one area of the aircraft produces a spike, engineers see it instantly. When the X-59 begins community flyovers, it will fly over 8 to 10 US cities, and hundreds of sensors will map the exact pressure footprint. Why China is nervous about the X-59? China isn't nervous about the X-59 as an airplane. It carries no weapons. It won't spy on anyone. What makes Beijing uneasy is what the X-59 unlocks, and how far behind they are in this specific race, because if NASA proves that quiet supersonic flight is safe over land, the country that owns that data gets to shape the next generation of global flight rules. And right now, China has no seat at that table. China has fast jets, stealth jets, even hypersonic vehicles, but they don't have quiet Mach technology. Their programs, like the COMAC C-949, the AVIC next-gen concepts, and even their civilian supersonic studies, still produce shockwaves in the 84 PLDB range. NASA is aiming for 75 PLDB. You can feel the gap. The US spent over 20 years building low boom theory, doing thousands of hours of wind tunnel tests, and setting up community response studies with real residents. China has none of that. No quiet boom demonstrator, no validated acoustic maps, no regulatory trials, no international partnerships. It's speed without silence, and that means their aircraft can't legally fly over cities even if the tech matures. This is where the X-59 becomes a strategic weapon. Because if NASA proves the numbers, the FAA and ICAO can rewrite the supersonic flight ban that has existed since 1973. And whichever country supplies the data that changes the rule, controls the rule. NASA has already fed early acoustic models to ICAO, and the FAA is preparing for quiet Mach corridors by 2027 to 2028. China has zero influence in this process. They simply have nothing to submit. And that's just the civilian side. Quiet supersonic tech has military consequences that Beijing is paying attention to. A jet that can cruise above Mach 1.4 without creating city-shaking booms can be repurposed into silent long-range reconnaissance, rapid reaction mobility, or low acoustic strike pathways that are harder to detect with pressure and shockwave sensors. Chinese military journals have already expressed concerns about low acoustic reconnaissance aircraft and quiet supersonic interference platforms. They see exactly where this could go, and they don't have a counter. They're afraid of the US setting the rules for the next generation of speed before China can even participate. The future, why the X-59 matters. If NASA proves that quiet supersonic travel is safe, the US becomes the country that defines the standards, writes the rules, and shapes the global market. Every future supersonic jet, civilian or military, will need American acoustic data, American certification models, and American regulatory green lights. That's influence China can't buy, reverse engineer, or rush, because the next step after quiet Mach is scaled fleets. The moment the FAA and ICAO clear the airspace, US aerospace companies can build aircraft that fly from coast to coast in half the time, over land, legally, and without shaking cities. China would have to follow in a game the US has already been playing for 20 years. And NASA isn't doing this alone. Boom, Supersonic has raised over $700 million, inked 130-plus aircraft orders, and is planning a Mach 1.7 airliner the moment rules change. Exosonic is developing low-boom concepts for VIP and military transport. Even Lockheed Martin is preparing spin-offs for rapid ISR and supersonic logistics. This is how civilian innovation quietly becomes military advantage. A quiet Mach aircraft could move commanders between bases faster than satellites can predict. It could insert surveillance platforms into contested zones without shockwave sensors picking them up. It could create new response timelines, shrinking hours into minutes. Meanwhile, China still can't fly supersonic over its own cities. That's why the X-59 matters. Not because it's fast, because it solves the one problem no one else has touched: the boom. The nation that controls quiet supersonic flight controls the next era of global mobility, rapid strike pathways, and high-speed transport. And right now, the US is the only player on the board with a real prototype in the sky. The X-59 is funny. It flies at Mach 1.4, and the loudest thing about it is China's reaction. If you like aircraft that break the rules without breaking windows, hit subscribe. We're just getting started with this new era of quiet chaos.